The iconic Quebec Bridge has stood proudly for over a century, but its construction is nothing to be proud of. It collapsed once, killing 75 workers. Learning from their mistakes, they rebuilt the bridge stronger and sturdier, except it collapsed again. This time, 13 people lost their lives. This is the story of the bridge that cost 88 lives to build. A bridge over the St. Lawrence River near Quebec City was considered as early as 1852, with the idea of connecting the railroad lines in Canada as part of the National Transcontinental Railway project. Push for the construction only came in 1986, when Wilfrid Laurier was elected as Prime Minister. The Quebec Bridge Company was formed to build an unprecedented span. The chosen design was a massive cantilever bridge. At completion, it would be the longest of its kind, with a main span of 549 meters. Famous American bridge designer Theodore Cooper was one of many engineers on the project. While he had a good reputation, he was known to be arrogant. He approved Peter Slapka's design for being the best and the cheapest. Cooper also lengthened the bridge from 490 meters to avoid building costly piers in deep waters. When Robert Douglas, a Canadian government engineer, reviewed Cooper's plans, he was alarmed at the slim margin for error and criticized the high stresses the longer span demanded. Cooper didn't take nicely to the critique. This puts me in the position of a subordinate, which I cannot accept. Douglas was booted from the project, and as the companies involved recognized Cooper's influence, his word became final in most decisions. He was now effectively in charge of the construction. Despite his hubris, Cooper couldn't oversee the construction in person. Claiming ill health, he stayed in New York and communicated via letters and telegraphs. Day-to-day supervision fell to Inspector Norman D. McClure and engineer Edward A. Hoare. Besides their unfortunate names, Hoare and McClure were also far less experienced. Neither of them has ever worked on a project of this scale. To add to the challenge, the company contacted to fabricate and erect the steel was eager to finish on schedule to avoid penalties. Thus, from 1905 onward, the bridge's giant steel skeleton rose steadily over the river, with immense pressure to stay on schedule and budget. In the summer of 1907, workers noticed that some parts didn't fit together. Pre-drilled holes for the rivets did not line up. More ominously, the massive horizontal beams which experienced the heaviest loads had visibly bent out of line. McClure was the first to sound the alarm. He wrote to Cooper about the deflections, but neither of them was too worried at this point. They assumed that these early bends might be artifacts of fabrication and arrived like that. But as the weeks went by, the distortions worsened. McClure was finding newly bent cords on a weekly basis, and each time he dutifully alerted Cooper. How did both these cords get bent? Cooper responded on one occasion, but shrugged it off. In August, McClure measured a deflection in one cord growing from 19mm to 57mm in just 2 weeks. At this point, he and even some foremen had enough and halted work on the bridge. McClure traveled to New York to warn Cooper in person. When they met on the 29th of August, Cooper at last grasped the severity of the situation. He drafted a telegram to the Phoenix Bridge Company's headquarters instructing add no more load to the bridge until after due consideration of facts. However, they were just a bit too late. The telegram arrived when the chief engineer was out, and in his rush to the company's office, McClure forgot to telegraph the construction site. At the bridge, the foremen who had paused work changed their minds. Reassured by Chief Engineer Hoare, work continued into the late afternoon. Timekeeper Joseph Hugh was about to blow the end of the day whistle. As they were wrapping up, one man named Bouvet, who had driven a rivet into a beam an hour earlier, just saw that rivet split in two from the string. Bouvet was luckily able to fight free of the tangle of steel underwater and survived with a broken leg. After sprinting for his life, the timekeeper makes it to solid ground in just the nick of time. 10 kilometers away, in the city of Quebec, people believed an earthquake had struck. A locomotive had also gone down with the bridge, but a tugboat crew pulled the injured train engineer from the river alive. Others were not so fortunate. Of the 86 workers on the span, 75 were killed outright or died shortly after. The tragedy struck the Mohawk indigenous community of Kanawake especially hard. 33 of the victims were Mohawk iron workers famed for their skill at high steel work. Many were buried back home under a marker fashioned from the very steel beams that claimed their lives. The Canadian government moved quickly, launching a Royal Commission of Inquiry the very next day. The hearings lasted months. Their final report, issued in February of 1908, made it clear that the buckling of the two lower cords in the south anchor arm near the main pier led to the collapse. These massive steel members simply were not strong enough. Digging deeper, the commission uncovered multiple fatal mistakes in the design and management of the project, including the underestimation of dead load. Cooper and Slapka had assumed the bridge's own weight, called the dead load, far too low in their calculations, and never revised their figures even as the design grew heavier. The inquiry did not result in criminal charges, as the legal framework at the time didn't provide mechanisms to prosecute engineers. But it was safe to say that the Quebec Bridge was Cooper's last ever project, especially since he was close to retirement. Following the inquiry, a much more experienced board of engineers was assembled. The general cantilever design remained, but with much beefier components. The government wasn't taking any chances this time. Independent design checks were implemented. The board of engineers calculated their own design in parallel to the contractor's design and compared every detail. The government also maintained a large inspection force of over 30 engineers on site to oversee construction. By August of 1916, the two mighty cantilever arms were complete. All that remained was to install the central suspended span, a colossal 5,100-ton piece. Engineers chose an innovative and daring method to place this span. It was fully assembled on shore, then floated to the site on barges and jacked up into position. This was cutting edge for the time. It was the largest single piece of metal ever moved and lifted in one go. Reportedly, a crowd of 100,000 people, including former Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier, gathered on the 11th of September to watch the impressive engineering feat. The operation was slow but smooth. The central piece reached its destination without any hiccups and was successfully connected. But out of nowhere, the ominous sound of metal snapping was heard once again. The piece, which took hours to be elevated, came falling down in an instant, killing 13 workers. After having faced tragedy once, and with so many brilliant minds, how did disaster strike yet again? Since it was the middle of the Great War, German sabotage was briefly suspected, but the real cause was neither malice nor negligence this time. As many engineers witnessed the event, it was quickly understood that a steel casting responsible for holding the lifting girder, and in turn the centerpiece, broke in such a way that the girder kicked back, allowing this corner of the span to simply fall off. This time, even with dozens of well-qualified men giving it their best, tragedy was near unavoidable. Experience teaches us again that disaster may come even to the most careful. There is a lurking possibility of failure in every task that the engineer performs, and that when such a failure comes, those who suffer by it deserve the broad and generous sympathy of their brethren. Construction after the second collapse resumed almost immediately. The government granted access to the required steel despite the high demands created by the war effort. Almost exactly a year later, a new centerpiece was raised and this time successfully put in place. The Quebec Bridge was finally complete. On the 17th of October 1917, the first train made its way across. 30 years, $23 million, 88 lives. That was the cost of the Quebec Bridge.